Welcome, one and all, again to another episode of the Retro Monster Truck Review. This week, we go back to one of my favorite venues, Matt, and that's the Louisville Motor Speedway, the figure eight monster truck racing that started back in, I believe, 1988. This is just some stuff that is amazing to watch. This track, you could never really predict a winner, even back then, versus now.
Not only is it an incredible race, an incredible weekend, we get some trucks that we didn't get to see a whole lot on TV back then. So there's a whole lot of surprises and a whole lot of action in store.
Oh, yeah, there's a whole lot of action in store. This lineup right here, I mean, my goodness. Gravedigger number 7, Dennis Anderson. Carolina Crusher number 3, Gary Porter. Equalizer, David Morris. Predator, Alan Pizzo. Bill Weaver Jr. behind the wheel of Rambo. Kodiak, Mark Bendler. Master of Disaster, David Cook. Barely Tame, Doug Spanier. Auto Value King Crunch with Scott Stevens. Excalibur and Chucky Pauken. Tropical Thunder, Wayne Smozanik. Taurus is here this weekend, but actually doesn't compete. And then we have No Problem as well. Unfortunately, not in night one. I guess it threw a rod on the parade lap, unfortunately.
Yeah, I was talking to Tad Goad. He was there that weekend helping out with the No Problem team, and they kind of got booked late into the show, kind of at John's request. He wanted to be at his, close to his hometown type show, so they got him in there before the show, and unfortunately, night one throws a rod on the parade lap, and they drove all night back to the shop to go get the engine out of No Problem number 2 and had the truck ready to go then for day number 2, which I think we're going to cover next week. So a lot of big lineup. We got a bunch of trucks, and then 2 of them end up not racing. Taurus, officially, the answer is RII issues. They couldn't race for the weekend. But Ken Brew, if you keep an eye out through some of the 1992 shows where he does, pre-taped segments going into racing at various shows, he's in the pits at Louisville, and he does some segments there with Taurus. So the truck's there, just didn't race that weekend.
Yeah, kind of a mystery as to why. Official reason, like we said, we were given is RII issues, but you never really know as far as stuff like that goes. Electrical, it could have been anything all the way throughout that truck. They probably chased it the whole weekend trying to get the truck ready to go, but unfortunately, Taurus never makes the call. But the lineup that we end up having here seems like an even matchup between these newer style suspension trucks, these newer frames, these newer shock absorbers that are on these vehicles, and then we've got the old leaf spring tried and true method as well. Just kind of evened out the whole bracket, really.
Leaf Springs, but they're some of the best Leaf Spring trucks on the circuit at that point. We've got Barely Tame, who's kind of on a roll in 92. We've covered a few of his wins earlier in the season, one in Oklahoma City, where we talked about here on the Retro Monster Truck Review. And then we've got Excalibur, which is, kind of a stage 2.5 truck almost, very well damped, but still running Leaf Springs. They're double shackled. They work really well. We've got, just all these different trucks. Rambo's still a top runner in the Thunder National Series at the time as well. So we've got a huge field of trucks, again, something that's a little bit different for the TV show in terms of 1992 goes. We don't just have the top 6 at this one. We've got a marquee event. Ken Brew's there in person because Louisville's pretty close to Cincinnati, his hometown. He's on location. And we opened the show with Joe Lowe kind of giving us some action shots and explaining that we're on a figure 8 track this weekend.
Yeah, he explains the figure 8 track. We see a lot of close-up action shots. One shot I want to point out in particular is Charlie Pauken in Excalibur. They show him coming over the cars, and when he lands, they have a very nice close-up view, and you can see just how much he's bouncing around and moving in that cab with that truck, just how hard of a hit these guys are taking that first or second time by when they hit those cars.
Yeah, they're really selling the fact already that this is going to be a tough track, difficult to get around. There's going to be a lot of action. We see a full crowd pan shot into the ESPN Speed World intro, which you and I have talked about before, kind of builds the tension a little bit. I really love that intro myself, and we join back in with Ken Brew here at the beginning of the show.
Yep, we join in with Ken Brew. One thing I would like to point out here real quick before we go into what Ken Brew does here, the trucks are set up a little differently. Some of them are. I believe it's Predator has the tires on mounted backwards to try and get some more traction. We also see some guys running in 2-wheel drive out here just to try and save the equipment for the entire weekend. A lot of different setup and strategies between these guys.
Yeah, we'll see how those play out throughout the night. Some of them it'll work, some of them not so much.
Yeah, very, very true. Ken Brew, like you said, introduces us from the press box, and then we immediately go to a commercial only to come back with Ken in the scoring tower explaining that there has been some attribution, some broken parts, and some bad qualifying did a number on the field. However, in reality, there was no qualifying. The cars are fresh for round number 1 here.
Yeah, a little creative license here in the show, but we've got a big field of trucks. They didn't do qualifying at this show. Just line them up and let them rip.
Yep, exactly. By the way, -1 on the broadcast already for misspelling Excalibur.
Excalibur spelled wrong. Predator spelled wrong. The guy.
That's another one too. How do you misspell Predator? There's literally a movie with Arnold Schwarzenegger on the cover.
Yeah,
you could just go look at that, or you could look at the side of the truck and the footage. I mean, come on.
Whoever's doing the graphics, it must have been Friday at quitting time when they put this one in, because there's a few typographical errors for sure.
That's very true. And speaking of a guy that always has some typographical errors in his name, Wayne Smozanik in Tropical Thunder going to be taking on Barely Tame here. We see the title cards for each driver. Joe mentions this is a north and a south battle between these two guys.
Yeah, we've got the Minnesota truck, Doug Spanier, Barely Tame, and then Wayne Smozanik. Smozanik's name also spelled wrong. It's spelled as Smozank in Tropical Thunder here. Again, man, the guy behind the computer having a rough day with the keyboard, but he's out of Jupiter, Florida, a 4-link truck versus a leaf spring truck, which we're going to see in every matchup here in round number 1. One of these 4-link coilover shock trucks going up against a leafer.
Yep, and to me, that's what I said earlier. This is kind of like an even bracket between one method versus another right here, and it's going to be the leaf sprung truck that ends up taking the win right here. Barely Tame, and a pass that kind of reminds me a lot of Bigfoot 4 around this particular track anyway. Doug makes a very smooth pass over the cars, where Wayne kind of noses in, rebounds, comes up, and crashes back down to the asphalt pretty hard. We don't really see that he actually continues the run here, as Spanier just kind of moves on and really just takes a smooth pass and moves on to the next round.
A really smooth pass. We see him kind of land on top of the cars the first time around after the first turn. He kind of lands, crushes the roofs down the downside, and keeps going. Wayne lands in a similar area of the cars, but the truck, being lighter, doesn't really crush the cars down as much, and the cars kind of launch him way back up into the air, and he takes a hard hit on the landing on that asphalt.
Oh, yeah, rebounds very hard, and it doesn't help that truck's taller than probably every truck here in the field. So then suspension collapses and then shoots him back up. He's got a long way to go up.
Long way up and then a long way back down. So we see Barely Tame coming back around, nice and smooth. Spanier getting the job done. And the finish line jump for the first hit, boy, he couldn't have done it just about any better. Nice and smooth, perfectly clears the cars, downsides the ramp, and kind of pulls it into a little bit of a bounce wheelie there, but I'd call it a very, very smooth run overall.
Yeah, I would too. Those kind of landings too are kind of what makes the drivers every now and then, the guys that are watching anyway, kind of pop a little bit when they see guys jump and land perfectly on the down ramp. It's like one of those things it's a rare occurrence. So they almost always want to pop up a little bit with it. And I can remember years ago when I was taking photos with Monster Jam, Dennis Anderson actually does this at St. Louis, jumps and lands down on the double bus ramp. And for a couple of years later, every time I would show those photos off to drivers, they'd be like, oh, he landed on the down ramp. Awesome. It's one of those things that's really cool. And especially with Spanier here, he does this at just about every pass he makes this entire night. He lands on that down ramp, pulls up a nice wheel stand.
He got it right the first time and then doesn't have to change it, I guess. And we kind of get a quick turnaround here. No replays, not much of anything. We just go right into race number 2, which is Kodiak versus Gravedigger.
Probably the most talked about and most replayed race from this entire weekend right here. This is Gravedigger and Kodiak. This race right here, man, I got to tell you, this is one that hurts as a Gravedigger fan.
Well, it was going good for a while anyway.
It went great for a little while.
Joe talks about Dennis being back after a lengthy time off. He's not that far removed from his knee injury still. Dennis has only been running Digger 7 for about, 3 months at this point. This is early June of 1992, June 6th. So he's had the truck out for, just shy of 3 months. And boy, he's going to put the power down in this run. They take off even, Digger and Kodiak. They're kind of sticking even throughout this whole race. They get to the first set of cars, and they're both looking good.
Yeah, when Dennis actually leaves the line, I don't know if you noticed it as well as I did. He had a lot of wheel spin going into that first inside line turn right there. A lot more than I'd seen from other trucks, clearly in four-wheel drive as he goes into that turn. As he comes out of it, though, him and Bendler are actually pretty even, fairly even over the first set. Bendler, they get into the middle of the second turn here at Louisville, and Bendler, you can kind of see, starts hopping the front wheels a little bit. The more he gets on the throttle, the more speed he carries, the more the truck wants to start pushing towards that outside lane. And Dennis has this on the exit of the turn, and I think that's where Bendler catches back up to him. And this is where a famous quote kind of comes in handy, and he says, oh, you know what? Dennis kind of got it in his mind that he was behind, and he mats that throttle just about as hard as he possibly can, and we see probably the biggest error Louisville Motor Speedway had ever seen at that point.
What's impressive here is that Dennis really only mashes the throttle about 3 truck lengths away from the cars. If you're looking, you can see the truck kind of squat down and take off there, which he's, maybe half a tire behind Kodiak at this point, and he's going for the win. And the 2 trucks, both of them, take a huge sky shot. The finish line just at the very end of the down ramp, but Kodiak noses the front of the frame in hard. Dennis lands at the starting line, which is a good, 40, 50 feet past the finish line. Yep. So a huge jump for Dennis. There's a lot going on here at one time. I'll go ahead and take the Kodiak side of it to start. The front end digs in. The truck gyrates over real bad. You see parts and pieces scattering out from underneath the truck. That thing is totally destroyed on the landing.
Oh, yeah. Kodiak is very hurt here. We hear Bendler actually say, I believe it's in show 2, say that the front of the chassis is actually bent quite a bit as well, just from this one nosedive landing here. The digger side of things, when Dennis lands, he actually says later in this episode that he grabbed the throttle just a little bit to make sure he still had control. I think that's what kind of bit him a little bit more here, because he carried even more speed when the truck started to slide sideways. And he side slaps the wall incredibly hard with the left side of that truck. And that's a hit that puts Dennis back out for a little while. He ends up actually breaking 3 ribs.
Yeah, a nasty hit. And if we take a look off of this big bounce that he bounces, gosh, it's got to be another 40 or 50 feet in the air before he touches down again. And he's pretty much into the corner when the truck finally gets all fours on the ground and he can start getting on the brakes at all or figuring out what he's going to do. And it's just too far gone at that point. On top of that, Dennis is running a set of cut Goodyears that are facing forward the normal way. So there's not a lot of contact patch, not a lot of traction, as you had mentioned on that takeoff. He was spinning real hard. Just everything going wrong for Dennis here at the end of the run. Smacks that wall really hard, perfectly square, which I'm sure still did a lot of damage to the truck, probably bent the shocks up and did some 4-link, suspension damage. But
imagine it hurt the rims as well, hurt the sidewalls of the tires. The truck was hurt. I mean, when he hit the wall, if you normally see a monster truck sitting straight, the cab of Digger is almost, I mean, as hard as it hits, it almost looks like it could go on top of the wall from how hard it hit.
It's leaned over pretty good even when they zoom in on it, but I would venture to say, had Dennis hit the wall 20 degrees in either direction further, with the rear or the front first, he probably doesn't get hurt.
Yeah, that's another thing I was going to point out as well. There would have been something to absorb some of that impact more than just the complete sidewall of the tire.
Yeah,
and the rim.
He went into a completely rigid structure with the way that the suspension locates, and it's all solid. It doesn't really have an axis to move on that way. So all of the force of Dennis's body just goes right into the side of his seat. And, we talked to him a little bit later, and then, we'll go into the injury a little bit further at that point.
Yep. Carolina Crusher Master Disaster up next here. This is the battle of short wheelbase and long wheelbase. And I mean, Gary Porter's truck looks like you could fit 2 more Carolina Crushers into the lane next to him, honestly, with how short the Master Disaster machine is. Of course, this is the same Master Disaster that we saw all the way back in Dallas, 1990, taking a win with Doug Spanier behind the wheel. But now it's got a very tight turning course here to negotiate with if it's going to have any chance of beating Carolina Crusher on this track.
And let's not forget that Carolina Crusher, just a few weeks prior, was that short as well. This truck is newly lengthened.
Yep, newly lengthened. That was another point that I was going to make. Glad you made it as well.
Gary had just stretched the truck out, and this is one of his first events back with the new setup. And the 2 trucks kind of take off. Gary gets a whole shot, and boy, it doesn't really change much from there, does it?
No, it doesn't at all. We learned a little bit later Gary's actually running in 2-wheel drive here. But like we said, this is a different driver behind the wheel of Master of Disaster. Mr. Cook, I don't know if he just wasn't used to the truck or what, but he doesn't really take an aggressive shot onto the cars here. And it kind of shows here as Porter has just lengthened the lead out and continues to lengthen the lead out. We don't really see much of Master after that first set of cars as Carolina Crusher just goes on to take a nice smooth victory.
Yeah, and I think this David Cook is the guy who ends up buying the truck from Doug Spanier and renames it the Cook E Monster. I'm pretty sure this is the same guy, and he had been driving, as far as I know, he had been driving that whole year to this point. But you know, maybe this was pretty early on for him. I'm not totally sure. I'm trying to think. Jim Thomas was driving the truck in Oklahoma City, so it probably was a little earlier for David now that I think about it. But you see the trucks come around to this first set of cars, and it's a good thing that there was a big disparity in distance between the two, because Gary hits the cars, kind of does a similar bounce to what happened to Smozanik in the earlier race. He kind of gets thrown up and off the cars, but he heads completely into Master Disaster's lane.
Yeah, he kind of bounces, goes into the other lane a little bit here, but like you said, he had such a big lead at that point, it didn't really hamper or hurt the Master Disaster truck, and it didn't hurt him as well. I mean, he could just get back on the throttle, go back to the outside lane, and move on.
Yeah, and Thomas, boy, he completely demolishes the front end. He kind of lands on the brakes. I don't know if he saw Gary ahead of him in his lane and reacted or what happened. Excuse me, David Cook. But a lot of damage for Master Disaster. That's going to be it for him for the night. Gary kind of just putts around, limps over the cars, and takes it to round number 2.
We move on to Predator, or Predator, if you want to say it that way, but they misspell the name. Preditor. Never heard it spelled that way in my entire life. Taking on Rambo here. This is a very different look here, by the way, for Predator. We're used to seeing either the original blue that was on the truck or the famous black cat design that would come later. Here we have a Snoop nose kind of Chevrolet body with a bright white, almost neon yellow name on the side of it, a little bit of blue and red flowing along the sides. A very different look, a drastic different look for Predator, but it's still one that stands out, and that's something that truck's always been known for.
Yeah, it's unfortunate the scheme didn't get as much TV time. He started running this scheme kind of towards the end of 1990 on the Leaf Spring truck, and then through 91, and then he builds the 4-link truck for 92 with a front engine, which he's running here, and runs the rest of the USHRA season, pretty much the whole summer schedule. He's running with USHRA and is really, really making a name for himself in terms of the bookings there, and gets picked up for the 93 season as part of the Monster Wars series. And then we see the iconic cat design come along with one of the first Patrick chassis that was built for a customer. Alan Pizzo got that truck with the front-facing 4-link from Dan Patrick. So a lot happening here in a short amount of time for the Predator team, and this is where Alan really finds his identity through these, 12-month period.
Yeah, this is where Predator starts to really come on, and this is an event that really kind of showcases Allen very well. Predator gets the whole shot. Both trucks are pretty even coming out of the first turn. Predator gets a little bit better over the cars as Rambo bounces, and that's a signature thing you're always going to see out of Bill Weaver Jr. and Rambo, is that truck bouncing like crazy. That's why it was such a star on the Thunder National circuit. Maybe not necessarily designed for this style of track, but they get it figured out before the end of the weekend. Predator pulls away from there, and Pizzo just keeps it nice and low over the cars for the finish line after Bill just kind of has to chase the bounce.
Yeah, the bounce really gets him. The Rambo truck puts on a great show every time, and he was getting a lot of bookings through USHRA on top of his Thunder National stuff as well. So Rambo getting more and more popular. We're seeing a lot of these trucks that are kind of breaking through and making it to that sort of elite level in the industry here, getting the top bookings at the top shows now. And Rambo, they'd run that truck till like 2000 or something like that, maybe even longer with the Leaf Springs. They had 2 trucks going there in the late 90s. So they really got their money's worth out of that piece of machinery.
Oh, they certainly did, and that's still one of the trucks that a lot of people talk about, is that Rambo machine. And we're going to talk about it again eventually on this show. There's another certain event from, I believe, West Lebanon that I'd really love to talk about, where Rambo ends up kind of in the door of USA 1. But anyway, skipping ahead here a little bit, we go to the next race, Excalibur, another misspelling that just irks me. It always gets me when they misspell the name of a truck. They could just look at the footage and see the name spelled correctly on the side of the door. But anyway, I'm not going to rant on it, I swear. Charles Pawkins behind the wheel takes on Equalizer.
Yeah, so we got Excalibur right now on the title card. It's at least spelled right, but then Pawkins, well, it was a mystery for years what Chucky's real full name actually was. Was it plural? Was it singular? You know, the only way to check is on his Facebook page. So,
This
you
is
know,
true.
so an interesting matchup here because Excalibur, again, a Thunder Nationals favorite going up against Equalizer now. We're billing as the top truck of 1992 on the TV series this year. He's really going after it hard. So I think it's going to be an interesting matchup. We get a whole shot for Equalizer off the line.
Yeah, we get a whole shot here from Equalizer, but I mean, Excalibur on the other side, though, I think Chucky Mikes takes it just a little bit easy into the turn. But unfortunately, going into turn 3 for Equalizer, it just kind of dies on him, and Excalibur gets to come back and take the win with a solid jump over the finish line. A race that honestly, had both trucks been 100%, could have been the race of the night. I mean, you look back at these two names going back to the TNT days. This was kind of always one of those dream matchups that you would have. Maybe not exactly the Excalibur truck that we would have thought we would have saw the dream matchup with, but at the same time, still these two iconic names taken off against one another right here. It's unfortunate that we have Equalizer just die in turn number 3.
Yeah, Equalizer, we'd come to find out, we'll talk about it next week here on the review, that Equalizer's having fuel pump issues. It's going to sideline him quite a bit here in these early goings, but I agree, this is going to be the race of the night if Equalizer holds together, and that's saying something with the Gravedigger Kodiak matchup that we've already had. We've got some big time power here in Louisville, and I think it would have been a close race. We see Chucky come over the finish line here, and boy, you see how bad he gets jostled around side to side. The containment seats that we have today are definitely keeping the drivers in better shape compared to back then.
Yeah, he's bouncing all over the place in there. And then we get to the last, well, the buy run of round number 1 here. I'm assuming this is where no problem would have fit into the bracket. The Auto Value King Crunch goes out by itself for a solo lap, and honestly, it's a pretty reasonable lap here from Scott Stevens. He puts down a really good run here. Has a little bit of overcorrecting after the first turn, but other than that, he looks very fast here on this Louisville course.
Yeah, Scott's looking smooth. Like you said, a little bit of overcorrection and wavering in the first turn, but it's a fast run. I didn't time these myself, but he's looking smooth over the cars, keeps it kind of low, and puts in a good run. I'm sure he's thankful to have that buy run.
Yeah, I mean, who wouldn't be thankful on this track to have the buy run right here? Joe says he needs a break, and Ken sets the stage for round number 2. See if we can have Gravedigger come back, or if Kodiak can be fixed. We go to commercial and come back, and Kirk Carter and his family are in the stands from the Louisville area. As Ken Brew kind of puts it, Louisville, by God, Kentucky. And he says his son's favorite truck is Excalibur. Ken runs through the bracket for round number 2. Earlier in the bracket rundown, it was Excalibur, and then they fixed it correctly to be spelled in this part of the bracket, yet they still can't seem to spell Predator right.
Yeah, tough day in the office for the editing guy, right? And
well, they must have got rid of one guy. He fixed it, but then they've got the other guy over here that still hasn't taken his job seriously. But anyway.
Yeah. So we at least get the brackets laid out here, and we've got Rambo versus Carolina Crusher, and that's going to be an interesting first matchup here in round number 2.
Yeah, again, short wheelbase versus long wheelbase, newer style suspension versus older style suspension. Rambo's actually taking the place of either Kodiak or Gravedigger. Both trucks are broken. Rambo actually gets this was a surprise to me. Rambo gets a whole shot, but then we learn later Gary's actually in 2-wheel drive to save the equipment here. Again, another bad bounce for Weaver, and that's what ends up costing him the win as Porter goes on to take the win by about 4 truck lengths.
Yeah, the trucks, I would say, are pretty even when they come to the cars, not side by side necessarily, because we've got, the shorter track on the inside, but I'd call the trucks pretty even to the first set of cars. And then that big bounce, like you said, for Rambo is really what puts him away here.
Yeah, that's the signature bounce, though, from Rambo. You can't not take that out of that truck, as far as I'm concerned. Next race, Equalizer and Barely Tame right here. We get an interview with Dennis Anderson. Jim Clark is with him, and Dennis says he's fine. He got the wind knocked out of him. In reality, like we had said earlier, Dennis actually had broken 3 ribs, and he wouldn't find out until later that evening. Dennis says he was just going too fast when he slid into the wall, and I can't argue that point at all. He was going pretty fast, sliding sideways into that wall in Louisville.
He hit it hard. And what's interesting is he really wanted to make sure that would never happen again. So when they came back the next year in Louisville, Dennis took the set of tires off of Gravedigger number 4 and put them on his truck for that weekend. So if you watch the Monster Wars episode, you see those flat Firestones. They're 66 by 43s, not the 6650s he ran on Gravedigger number 2, but they're 66 by 43 Firestone tires. He ran those specifically because those cut tires kind of bit him the year earlier in Louisville, put him in the wall. So he was always thinking about that and always mentioned how the wall got him this year here in 92, and he did not want it to happen again.
Yeah, and I don't blame him one bit for taking those tires and throwing them on that truck for the next year out there. You want to have as much contact on concrete as you possibly can. That's why NASCAR runs slick tires. I can see why he swapped them out to do that. He always did very well, I thought, with Digger number 2 around this track as well when he was running the big wide flat Firestones then.
Yeah, the contact patch matters there on the asphalt. And in 93, Dennis would, end up, he would have made it to the finals one night had he not been DQ'd on the one race, and then he wins the night show, and I think he blew an engine in the third show. But the Firestones definitely worked in his favor in the following year. He learned, not necessarily from his mistake, but he learned from what happened the year prior.
Exactly, and you always got to learn in racing. Equalizer and Barely Tame here sitting on the line, though. Equalizer with a small lead in turn 1. And it happens again for David Morris. The truck dies. Barely Tame goes on to make a smooth run and slows way down around the final turn. If I remember correctly, Equalizer actually comes to a complete stop.
Yeah, pretty much just dies there in turn number 2. And Barely Tame, Doug Spanier, living the charmed life so far tonight, hasn't really had to face any real tough competition yet, but he's putting in a nice smooth run, and sometimes that's all it takes. He really slows down on this one, though, kind of taking his time. He must have seen Equalizer sitting up there, maybe thought that he was going to crash into him at the X or something, and then once Equalizer stops, he kind of picks the pace back up and goes for it and pulls a nice little wheelie off that final jump again.
And you got to commend him for doing that as well and recognizing that he's got a big lead here and he can see where the other truck is and kind of slowing down a little bit. He's a little bit smart driving and as well as saving his equipment.
Yeah, and with the night we've had so far with a lot of breakage, we've got to make sure that you can just get to that next round.
Speaking of next round, Tropical Thunder here with Predator, two drivers and 2 trucks that have had their names misspelled, mispronounced, and misspoke very much over the years. Alan Pizzo gets the whole shot here. Predator almost spins out on corner entry, though, and boy, he was very close to doing so. You watch that truck, he's actually doing a drift into the first turn.
He barely got it back going, and he kind of takes it easy coming out of that first turn and kind of crab walks his way up to the cars a little bit. You could see he's using the rear steer, which I'm not sure if that's the best strategy at this point, but that's what he's going with, and he's able to hold on. Tropical Thunder does start making up some time on that inside track, but it's just not enough for Wayne to catch up.
Yeah, not enough to catch Predator right here, who wins by about 2 seconds, I would say. Honestly, though, a very sloppy run from Pizzo, just uncharacteristic of him, but still he gets the job done.
Got the job done into that next round. That's all that matters. They don't ask you, how much you won by. When you go to the pay window, it's just the numbers on the check, win or lose, and the winner gets the bigger one.
It's very true here, and we've got 2 guys right here that are definitely trying to win this event. Excalibur and Auto Value King Crunch. Excalibur with a whole shot on the inside track, exiting the corner. Truck swaying a little bit as Pauken gets back on the throttle coming towards the cars. Chucky carries a lot of speed going down to the top side, but kind of falls behind a little bit. He buries the throttle coming out of that last turn to kind of catch up with Stevens here. And I got to tell you, what gets me is he buries the throttle, and just before he hits those cars, he lets out a little bit, and as soon as he hits the ramps, he jacks back into that throttle, man, and he launches just about as far as Gravedigger did.
He launches as far as Digger did. He lands right on that starting line as well, and he takes a huge bounce, but he kind of got his momentum to the right side a little bit earlier and was able to cut through the grass more than Dennis did, just a little bit, and kind of didn't get the truck yawed over to one side. And I think that's the difference here. I mean, props to Chucky for the testicular fortitude to bury the throttle after having seen what Dennis had happened to him earlier. He goes and does the same thing and somehow gets the truck shut down right before the wall down there underneath the flag stand. But Stevens has got big problems in the other lane.
Yeah, Stevens actually demolishes the truck. They say on air, I believe, oh, it looks like he flattened a tire. It's not the case. He actually looks like he's broken either a champagne or he's broken an axle housing on Auto Value King Crunch here. Unfortunate for him after having that first round bye, which looked very fast. Unfortunately, he had to go up against probably one of the fastest trucks here on the circuit.
Yeah, and Chucky was looking good, and you could see that he had the power there. And we see Ken Brew in front of Excalibur. He says, but he's going off, being towed off the track. And it looks like it might be Dave Marquardt up there in the driver's seat helping them get the truck off the track. But we'll have to see if he's able to come back here for the next round. We're going to the final four after a commercial.
Yep, we go into the final four right after that commercial, as you said. Ken says Excalibur also turned in the fastest time of the night on that last pass here. It'd be a shame if he couldn't come back. The interesting thing here is they show the bracket going into this semifinal round here. They say Barely Tame is going to get inserted into Equalizer's place. Now, what's wrong there?
Yeah, again, the editing guy, really a mess. I don't know if it was just Ken live kind of got mixed up, so they kind of did that on the bracket as well. But yeah, Equalizer had not won a race at all. Barely Tame was the winner and rightfully should have gone into the semifinals. So everything looks like it's all well and good here going into the brackets for the semifinals, the way they're actually going to happen.
That's very true. Barely Tame and Carolina Crusher on paper is a very good matchup. We got two very experienced drivers behind the wheel here. Of course, Gary Porter and Doug Spanier. Gary says he's running in two-wheel drive just to survive. He's trying to get the bounce out of the truck, while Spanier says they're going to lean into the truck and lean out harder. You hit that jump hard. You hit the jump smoother. You hit the jump hard. The harder you hit it, the smoother you land. There, I got it out.
Yeah, and I don't know what Doug was watching, but that definitely wasn't the case so far tonight. With the harder you hit it, the more damage and danger you're in, as far as I'm concerned. But Gary and Doug are both kind of running smooth so far tonight. I think it's going to be a matter of who ends up making a mistake or who can just carry more speed and kind of push it a little bit further than they had so far.
Well, you make up a very valid point there, by the way. The trucks that are hitting it harder and jumping farther are the ones that are having the trouble, whereas Spanier's got a much heavier truck than these guys. He's able to probably launch it farther and have it land smoother for him with that extra added weight.
Yeah, that's a good point, but I think if he takes an Excalibur shot, that truck's going to kind of self-destruct as well. I mean, Barely Tame was built tough.
I agree with you there, but the thing of it is, I don't know if the truck's got the power to do that kind of a launch.
Well, it may. I mean, you could see that Doug hasn't really gotten the full throttle launch yet so far tonight, and we'll see if he has to push it hard enough to do so. But he gets at least started off right with a whole shot against the Carolina Crusher in two-wheel drive.
Yeah, and then Gary immediately spins into the infield with the Carolina Crusher, and that two-wheel drive comes back to bite Gary. He's got no pull in the front tires. The rear end comes around on him, and that's just all that Doug Spanier needs at that point. He opens up a lead. Porter tries to come back, but it's not enough, as Barely Tame will move on to the next round.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. I'm not sure why Gary, if he was purposely running it in two-wheel drive the whole night, or if there was some issue that, kind of forced his hand there. I can't imagine why you'd want to voluntarily run the truck in rear-wheel drive only, at least from the start. But, I wasn't there. I can't really comment on that part of it. But it certainly reduces your pace and your controllability around the track, as we saw here from Porter, as he just kind of gets loose and slides into the infield.
It's unfortunate for Porter, but we move on to the next round here. Rambo is going to come back for Excalibur, which is a huge letdown for me as an Excalibur fan watching this. You was really hoping Chucky would be able to pull through and they would be able to get the truck fixed to come back. Easily the fastest truck on this course this particular night. He's going to be taking on Alan Pizzo and Predator. Pizzo says he's dialed in now, and there's a lot more left in it. He made some suspension adjustment and re-geared the truck before this round. Makes you wonder if he put a taller gear in or if he put a shorter gear in for this track.
I'm guessing probably a taller gear. If they had one of those Profab quick change transfer cases, they could change their gearing kind of on the fly. And we hear Bill Weaver saying that he wants to make a gearing change as well. So, these are two guys that have never run on the figure eight course in Louisville to this point. And I'm sure they probably weren't necessarily prepared for how long you're really in the throttle around these turns.
Yeah, Pizzo gets the whole shot here and almost loses it in the first turn again with the Predator Tokyo Drift coming around the first turn. He hits into that corner. It helps him straighten up and straighten out the middle section of this little sweeping turn that he's got here on the inside, and he kind of pulls right away from Rambo here. Rambo gets bit by that bounce again over the cars, and that's really all Pizzo needed.
And it's a good thing that it happened for Rambo there with that bounce, because Pizzo's kind of riding thin ice, trying to carry that much speed around that inside corner. It just was not sticking for him. Rambo, kind of exits the last corner almost in the lead, but Pizzo with more momentum on the outside is able to get it done. About a truck and a half victory for him. It was a little bit better race when I actually watched it than I had initially remembered. It was a good finish.
Yeah, it was a great finish between these two trucks, and Weaver really holds his own here for a truck that hadn't won the entire night. He was I would say, a few seconds away from being in the final round.
Oh yeah, I mean Rambo was doing a good job overall. It's just not his night in Louisville. He ran into tougher competition.
Yeah, ran into a little bit tougher competition. One thing that kind of jumps out at me here is the kind of nights that we're watching between Barely Tame and Predator. It's a reminds like Barely Tame really reminds me, just the way that the mannerisms of the truck jumps and lands. It reminds me a lot of Bigfoot 4 in 1990, the way that truck's moving around this track. And Predator kind of reminds me of Awesome Kong around this track. Right before they put the skinny body on that truck, the Awesome Kong came out and had just a slow and steady night and took the win in Louisville. That's just the kind of comparison as to what I'm seeing here from previous Louisville races to this one that we're watching right now.
Yeah, and Barely Tame is not all that dissimilar from Bigfoot 4 in the way that it's built. Kind of similar wheelbase, maybe just a hair longer, but it's reacting well, kind of staying stable in the corners. And then Predator just kind of taking the low slung approach and just kind of getting the job done each round so far. But we're heading into the finals here. Um, Alan Pizzo tells Jim Clark that he's going to have to be good in the corners and make a smooth race. And Spanier says he's not going to do anything different. The truck's working excellent. So he's kind of confident that he's going to be able to get the job done here, as we see Ken in front of Barely Tame right before those interviews, kind of introducing the trucks onto the speedway. I thought that was kind of a cool shot.
Oh, that was a great shot. The truck coming up and stopping with him right there. I think they timed that perfectly for him. Made him look even like a better broadcaster, just because the truck pulls up and stops almost like he called it there and willed it into the screen.
Yeah, and Ken, I always thought was kind of an underrated guy in terms of the lineage of monster truck announcers. He was kind of the what's the correct term? The play-by-play guy on the Bud Sports shows, where he's just kind of calling the action, and then Galloway's the color analyst.
Hmm.
So he kind of had more of the jovial, not corny as much, but kind of the more excitable mannerisms and so forth. But when he's doing this solo job as kind of host and then also pit reporter for Monster Truck Challenge, I think he did a fantastic job, and it showed the amount of time that he'd had around these trucks prior. He was able to do a very professional and knowledgeable job.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's a shame that a lot of people really remember him as the guy that would say "whoa" and "oh man" back in the late '80s. He's the guy that is really helping bring these shows along, as far as I'm concerned. He's kind of like we talk Monster Wars in a couple of episodes, and we talk about how Luann Lee kind of leads that broadcast very well. Ken Brew does the same job here, and he does it very well.
Yeah, and I'll even fast forward a number of years ahead, where you guys were covering a couple weeks ago here on the review with Cheech how bad Dan Moriarty did in that Nashville show in '99.
Uh-huh.
But by the time that contract was up in 2002, Dan had refined himself into a very good television host, pit reporter, and also live event announcer at that point as well. He really took some big steps to hone his craft. And once these guys are around these trucks, they're professionals and they want to do the best job they can over time. And you can really see the growth both from Ken Brew and from Dan Moriarty, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree with you there as far as Dan goes. We need to cover a show from 2002 to really show his growth as far as Monster Jam goes, and why he became one of those names that's synonymous and people remember him with Motor Madness. But anyway, we're finally here. We're at the finals of this Louisville Motor Speedway event. Slight hole shot for Predator. Allen loses it, though, mid-turn. Unfortunate for the Predator machine. It spins around into the infield and Barely Tame kind of just goes on from there and takes on a very smooth pass to the victory with another little bit of a wheelie after the finish line.
Yeah, Allen loses it kind of almost coming out of that first corner this time, and the truck just kind of snapped around on him. It didn't look like the chassis was loaded up too far. It didn't look like he was in a four-wheel drift necessarily. It just kind of loops out. I don't know if he hit a slick spot or what, but Spaniard takes advantage. He kind of puts in a smooth run over the first set of cars and then circles around kind of like he did all night, almost running uncontested throughout the entire night, just kind of gets the job done. And sometimes that's all it takes. You force the other guy into a mistake and you come across the finish line in the winner. And you see Doug does kind of get on it a little bit harder over the finish line, and the truck, I think it's just a really cool, like triumphant, like kind of an animal reaching up and, sprawling across that finish line, smoke coming out of the headers. It's just a really cool look for me.
Yeah, it was a very cool look. That particular race, I would say that the hunter became the hunted by the end of it. And damn, Barely Tame just walks away with the victory right here. Doug actually tells Jim at the end of the night, last year he hit the wall here with this truck, and it kind of had vengeance out for it tonight, running by himself practically all night. Ken wraps up the show on the asphalt, and we say goodbye as we go into the actual review portion of this show now, Matt. And I got to tell you, this is one of those shows that kind of jumped out and surprised me a little bit. It's one of those shows that you would not have expected the final round that you got.
You certainly don't expect it, and to be honest, you probably don't expect the winner either. You've got the Leaf Spring truck, Barely Tame, against the new four-link truck Predator. You'd say Predator's got the advantage, but as you know, Josh, you race with the Trigger King guys frequently, and oftentimes on kind of slick concrete pavement conditions like this, where the extra weight kind of helps you.
Yeah, that's one thing that was really helping out Barely Tame the entire night. It was keeping the truck smooth and low to the ground, even though Spaniard was really hard on the throttle all night long. Even though he had a few easy passes towards that final jump, he didn't really ever take it easy off that final jump. He was landing and popping wheel stands for the crowd.
Yeah, and really the truck stays planted in the corners. And as Ken kind of wraps up the show here, you see him standing in front of Barely Tame, and you can see where the dirt has worn off of the treads. You can kind of almost see the contact patch of the tire and how the tires are staying kind of glued to the surface on that heavier truck, whereas Predator just too light, got too much weight over on the side with the fluid suspension and caused him to lose control. So kind of backwards thinking here, the heavy leaf spring truck actually performs better. And definitely, as you said, a fantastic show. When I started tape trading back in like 2003, this was one of the ones I wanted on the first tape I got from somebody, and I did. And it was Louisville 92, where Dennis wrecks into the wall. I always wanted that show as a kid because I had seen the highlights on TV over the years. I'm like, I got to see this. And then you see Barely Tame wins, and you're like, oh, man, that's a surprise. So
yeah, you would have expected a semifinal between Gravedigger, Equalizer, Excalibur, and Carolina Crusher just looking at the lineup. And instead, we had Barely Tame and Carolina Crusher, which honestly, you expect Carolina Crusher to be there. And Rambo and Predator, you don't expect them to be there. You don't expect Barely Tame to be there. And honestly, as I was watching this show, it almost looked like, yeah, this is going to be like a Gary Porter kind of night. And then he gets into that race with Barely Tame and spins it out. And you're like, wait a minute. Whoa, what happened here, Gary?
Yeah, and I'm going to throw out also the had Kodiak not gone against Digger in round number 1, he probably would have progressed through the brackets a little further as well had he not had to yard sail it over that finish line jump. It was the best I'd ever seen Kodiak run on TV at any point. I think that Mark was doing a really good job that night, and I don't know if this is the point at which the truck, kind of started letting him down after that severe damage, if they never really could get it squared up again, but, throughout the 93 season, anytime else we saw him on TV, Mark had nothing but trouble.
Yeah, and unfortunate for Mark with that particular Kodiak truck. It was a really, really cool looking truck, by the way. It sat really low for being a leaf sprung truck. It was just one of those things that you would watch it, and sometimes it just didn't seem like that the suspension geometry just wasn't there with that particular vehicle. The power was there, obviously, to be able to keep up with Gravedigger, but it just didn't seem like he could keep a handle on that thing for a very long time.
Yeah, so, it's unfortunate. A lot of breakage this night. We're going to cover the following day's action next week here on the Retro Monster Truck Review. But, Josh, night number 1, how do we rate it?
Honestly, I got to give it an 8 out of 10. I really enjoyed the racing here at this particular event. There's few misspellings that they have that get on you, and you want to irk, and you want to talk about it and talk about how they can't spell drivers' names, they can't spell trucks' names right. But at the same time, they're bringing you some quality action and some quality camera work, and you've got some quality hosts bringing you this show as well with Joe Lowe and Ken Brew. Honestly, 8 out of 10. I thought it was an awesome show.
I thought it was a good show as well. I love Joe as the solo live commentary, and then Ken, again, as we talked about, kind of doing his job in the pits and as the show host himself. I'm going to hold a 7 out of 10 on this one, only because of the issues you mentioned and the fact that we had so much breakage from some trucks that we really would have liked to have seen gone on further in the bracket, and some of the races ended up being a blowout as a result of some other trucks issues. So there was some really, really high moments, but also a little bit of stuff that kind of left you sitting wanting for more. So I'm going to hold on a 7 out of 10 for this one, my official grade for this first night in Louisville.
You know, this show actually reminds me of the first few lines from the Real American song, when it comes crashing down and then it hurts inside for a lot of these guys out there. Like we said, though, pretty good ratings, I think. You with a 7, me and an 8. Honestly, though, Louisville Motor Speedway provides some of the greatest racing that monster trucks ever saw, and I'm so glad we can cover another event here, Evan, on the Retro Monster Truck Review. I really hope you all enjoyed it, and we'll see you guys again on the tracks across America.
Stay tuned.